I came prepared. I bought tickets as soon as they went on sale, and I even read the book before watching the movie. But a mere 2 minutes after seeing this, I was bewildered, puzzled, confused. How on earth could this be based on the book that I read? 2 hours later, I was even more confused. Had the old man officially lost it? Nothing about this movie made sense. Or did it? I was not alone in my reaction. Many others struggled to understand what they had just watched immediately after the film. One reason for this may have been that the director, Hayao Miyazaki, did not give audiences much to go on prior to the film's release. He didn't want audiences to have any preconceived notions about the film. There were basically only 2 tidbits of information given to Ghibli fans ahead of the film's release: that the movie was based on the book How Do You Live, a childhood favorite of Miyazaki's, and Toshio Suzuki revealed to us in an interview prior to the film's release that we could expect fantasy on a grand scale. For this reason, I chose not to watch any of the American trailers for the movie prior to watching it in theaters. I wanted to respect their wishes. However, had I watched a trailer, I may have been more prepared for the extreme fantasy universe I was about to step foot in rather than what I had read in the 1937 book. So what exactly did we watch? What was going on in this beautiful yet cryptic movie? There are 2 leading theories on the meaning of this film. Theory number 1 is that it tells the story of Miyazaki's life and it's autobiographical. Theory number 2 is The Boy and the Heron is an homage to the 13 most important Ghibli works to Miyazaki. I would like to add a third theory to the mix. The movie actually is a genius retelling of the book How Do You Live, just not in the way you would expect. A year later, after much research and contemplation, I can confidently say yes, all of these theories are true. I'm here today to explore the magic of The Boy and the Heron, its complex and confusing lessons and themes that once you understand, you will never view the movie in the same way again. For the sake of clarity, I will only be referring to the movie as The Boy and the Heron and the book as How Do You Live in this video because I will be referencing both many times and I don't want any confusion. Let's get into theory number 1. The Boy and the Heron tells the story of Hayao Miyazaki's life. I instantly thought this myself before I even watched the movie. When the film was announced to be based on this book, of course I looked it up, and when I saw this illustration of the main protagonist, Copper, I immediately thought of this picture of a young Hayao Miyazaki. The similarity is striking. Obviously, Hayao Miyazaki did not go on a fantastical journey through a magical land that we know of. But there are undoubtedly some huge chapters of his life that fit into the movie seamlessly. It has been said that the book How Do You Live was one of Hayao Miyazaki's favorite books growing up, and that it was very important to him during his formative years in shaping how he saw the world. Not only was it one of his favorites, it was also given to him by his mother, just like in the film. Miyazaki's mom had tuberculosis and was in the hospital for much of his childhood, just like Mahito's mother in the movie prior to the hospital fire. She loved to read books and would often read to Miyazaki when he came to visit her. We see the same affinity of books when Mahito's mom leaves him the book for him to read later in life. It has been said that Miyazaki's mom, too, gave him a copy of How Do You Live. Unlike the film, his mother did not pass away until Hayao Miyazaki was an adult in 1983. However, her illness cultivated the same experience of living in a one-parent household with his father being the sole provider. If Miyazaki's mother did not die at a young age, it begs the question, if the movie is autobiographical, why does Miyazaki make Mahito's mother die in such a violent, sudden way when he didn't lose his own mother in childhood? I believe that this scene is a representation of a traumatic incident in his childhood, also involving fire and war. He was born in 1941, the same year that Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor. and he was 4 years old when American planes attacked the city of Utsunomiya, where his family had been evacuated from Tokyo. He has said that he remembers a time when he saw a glow out the window and ran to hide under a bridge with his legs in the ditch. With the bombs still falling, his father carried him up the riverbank to a small truck driven by his aunt so they could escape. As Miyazaki and his father settled into the truck bed, a woman with a child asked if they could come too, but Miyazaki said, "We left them behind." A month later, the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Speaking of his father, exactly like Mahito's, he was in charge of an airplane and munitions factory making arms for the war, resulting in his family being extremely wealthy in comparison to the others in the small village they were relocated to from Tokyo. He relocated during the Pacific War to a rural village that had a huge house with a garden and a pond, much like the one we see in the movie, something that must have seemed enormous and magical to a child who was used to city life. Due to the differences in wealth, Miyazaki in turn struggled with class issues growing up and was oftentimes embarrassed by his family's wealth. He reported struggling with the idea that his peers that attended school with him were extremely poor. It was uncommon for families to have cars, and it was probably very embarrassing for his father to drop him off every day at school in a spiffy new vehicle. Another difference Miyazaki has noted in interviews when speaking about the class differences between him and his peers was that he was one of the few children who was lucky enough to eat white rice 3 times a day. When I read this, the scene of Mahito eating with the grannies and also the scene of the grannies clamoring over the suitcases of canned foods popped into my mind. These are clear representations of the abundance that Miyazaki felt his family had in comparison to others. Miyazaki also had a brother born around the same age as the little boy that we see at the end of the film, when the war was coming to resolution. However, Miyazaki not only had one brother, he was one of 4 sons in his family. I feel like too many siblings could have been confusing in the plot of the film, but I also think it's relatable to remember the sibling closest in age to you the strongest when recollecting your childhood. It has been reported that while Miyazaki is now infamous for his pickiness and attitude, he was even more ruthless in his younger years, and we can see this reflected in the scene where Mahito bashes himself in the head with a rock. He is so overcome with rage in this moment that he does something unthinkable and regrets it immediately. His regret is evident by his refusal to tell anyone what truly happened to him. This is such a vivid example of how anger can take over your body and make you do things you'll regret. Moving on to Miyazaki's adult life, it has been confirmed via the producer of the film that several of the film's characters are based on influential people in Miyazaki's life. Let's begin with the producer himself, Toshio Suzuki. He is the Heron. He says in an interview the first time he saw the Heron speaking to Mahito in the film, he laughed because it was an exchange similar to the way that Miyazaki and him banter back and forth and argue about things. Another fun fact Suzuki has reported, working with Hayao Miyazaki in the early years of his career was extremely difficult due to his anger problem. It's been reported that when becoming angry, Miyazaki would even yell things like, "I wish this studio would burn down." Due to the reputation he had in the office of having a bad attitude, no one wanted to sit by him. Suzuki took it upon himself to sit working, slouched over in silence, across from Hayao Miyazaki for 3 days, working the exact same schedule as him, reporting the first day they worked until 4 a.m. and returned at 9 a.m. the next morning. After 3 days of this, Hayao began speaking to Suzuki, asking him questions about the details of his animations and seeking feedback. Soon after this, the two of them became the best of friends. I can't help but wonder if the way that we're introduced to the Heron in the movie intentionally recreates the way that Suzuki and Miyazaki got to know one another. The first 3 interactions we see between Mahito and the Heron is silent, but on the 3rd, he begins to speak. There's also a similarity in the way that they are seemingly enemies at the beginning of the film, Mahito even crafting a bow and arrow to shoot the Heron out of the sky, but by the end of it, they are an unbeatable team. Isao Takahata was considered the other of the 3 pillars of Studio Ghibli and Hayao Miyazaki's closest friend and mentor. He is represented as the granduncle in the film. It has been speculated that due to the timing of his passing, Miyazaki was processing the grief of this loss while creating The Boy and the Heron, using his art to process what it is to lose someone dear to you and continue living on after they're gone. Knowing this was his choice of character to assign to Isao Takahata, it's evident that he viewed him as a wise man who helped keep Studio Ghibli together, similar in the way that the granduncle kept the other world together, always figuring out ways to arrange the blocks to keep them from falling apart. The character Kiriko is based on Michio Yasuda, an animator and color designer that Hayao Miyazaki and Takahata worked with for 50 years, beginning at Toei Animation before even the founding of Studio Ghibli. In an interview with a member of the staff for The Boy and the Heron, he said when working on scenes with Kiriko, Miyazaki would chuckle to himself and say, yes, that's exactly like Michi-chan, referring to Michio Yasuda. Hayao Miyazaki himself is represented in the movie as Mahito. However, I think there are similarities in Mahito and the granduncle. This similarity is more of a metaphorical one, but I believe Mahito's journey through the mysterious other world in the tower symbolizes Miyazaki's journey through his career, learning through trial and error what worked for his creative process. We see this in his struggles and triumphs. The delicate balance between creating art that is meaningful and has a significant message he wants to convey, but also making a product that will be commercially successful. This metaphor can be seen in the stories of consumption in the movie. The Wada Wada being a symbol for the pure creativity and art that comes from his heart, and the pelicans representing the cuts made to appeal to a commercial release. Most of the original creation makes it through to the world, but not the pure product. Much later in life, Miyazaki struggled with the same dilemma as the granduncle in the film, finding a successor for Studio Ghibli. There was a promising member of the Ghibli team early on that tragically passed away at a young age. At one point, producer Toshio Suzuki had his sights set on Miyazaki's son to take over the family business as traditional in Japanese culture. However, many of us know that story all too well. Miyazaki notoriously walking out of his own son's movie premiere puffing on a cigarette, saying something that roughly translates to "he's just not ready." Later on saying things along the lines of, as a filmmaker, you need to want to change the world with your movies. You may change nothing, but the passion is important. His son confessed in interviews later that he hated the process of animation. This struggle parallels the granduncle's search for a successor all too well. While it seems as though no successor will ever make Miyazaki films after he's passed away, and all of those working at Studio Ghibli have acknowledged this, that doesn't mean that Studio Ghibli will cease to exist when Miyazaki is no longer with us. But what remains will be very different. We can see this parallel in the people and creatures that escape through the doors while the other world is crumbling to rubble. None of the parakeets die, but what remains is something altogether different. Okay, let's get into theory number 2. The movie is actually a genius retelling of the book, How Do You Live? Let's begin by understanding the book, How Do You Live? This book was written in 1937 by a man who had previously been arrested by the Japanese government for being a socialist, in their words. In reality, he had just attended one meeting for socialism, and this was grounds to arrest him due to the heavy censorship by the Japanese government at the time. After his release from jail, he worked with another author whose vision was to create a book of ethics for young people to understand the changing world around them. Initially, their vision was to make a textbook. However, they decided that instead, they should make a story about a young boy interspersed with essays on ethics in the form of letters from his uncle. After beginning work on the book, the author's partner fell ill and dropped out of the project, leaving it up to him to complete. The result is a collection of short stories about a middle school-aged boy named Copper who lost his father at a young age and as a result had to move to a new city with his mother. He lived in a small village in Japan and began at a new school, initially struggling to make friends but eventually developing a really tight-knit group of 3 other boys. The novel follows the formula of one chapter being a situation and story from Copper's life, followed by an essay or letter written to him from his uncle explaining the ethics of the situation to help him navigate it. Throughout the duration of the book, the uncle writes these lessons in a notebook, and in the final chapter, gifts the notebook to Copper. One of the last short stories in the book is about a rumor that had been floating around the school. A group of older students were planning to beat up one of the boys in Copper's friend group for what they considered disrespecting him. As a result, Copper and his friends made a pact with one another that if these older students attacked them, that they would all fight back together so not just one of them would get in trouble. In this chapter titled Events on a Snowy Day, their worst nightmare comes true when one of Copper's friends accidentally breaks the arm off one of these older children's snowmen. Unfortunately, it was the same friend that supposedly disrespected these older students in the past. This confrontation ends with a beatdown. During this scene, Copper is cowardly and hides behind a snowman, watching his friends all fight back together. As a result of standing out in the snow and sweating profusely for a lengthy amount of time, Copper falls ill with a cold and spends 2 weeks at home in bed. During this time, he sorrowfully laments and regrets his actions. He wishes that he had been a better friend, and he struggles with the fact that his body froze despite him telling himself that he should fight back with his friends. He writes a letter to his friends apologizing, and a few days later, his friends show up at his doorstep to let him know that they accept his apology and that they never took it as seriously as he did. They also gleefully inform Copper that several of their parents had gone up to the school to complain about the events on the snowy day, and as a result, the older students had been suspended from school for 3 days. His friends all then decide to go together to retrieve one of their sisters from the train station so that they can play all day at Copper's house for the rest of the day. His mom instructs him to take a taxi cab from the station rather than walking due to him still recuperating from his recent illness. The chapter ends with a beautiful scene of all of the friends in the back together, again, happily laughing and joking with one another in the back seat of the taxi cab. In The Boy and the Heron, Mahito opens this very same book, How Do You Live? It's been left to him by his mother, and we see the inscription, To Grown-Up Mahito from Mother, 1937, autumn. We can assume that his mother wanted him to read this book and learn the lessons for himself to help him grow to be a better man. He opens the book in the bright light of the morning and sees his new stepmother walking into the woods. Much later in the day, as the sun is beginning to set, he's finishing the book, and we see the picture of a car on the final page as he wipes a tear from his face. This tells me that he must have just finished the chapter Events on a Snowy Day, because nowhere else this late in the book do any of the characters ride in a car. Knowing this is what he just read, it's now easy to see why it brought him to tears. When faced with the bullies at his own school, he froze, exactly like Copper did. He was unable to fight back, and he punished himself after the fact by smashing himself in the head with a rock. It's as if his mother was reaching out to him from beyond the grave to give him a powerful life lesson exactly when he needed it most, right after this troubling event had occurred. In the book, Copper's uncle took on a father figure role in his life, trying his best to teach him and help him to understand the consequences of his actions and the life lessons he could learn from them. In the book, each of the uncle's letters to Copper are titled, because in reality, these letters are essays on ethics, and the author wanted to share these with young people. In order, their titles are On Ways of Looking at Things, On Human Relationships and the Nature of Real Discoveries, On True Experience, On Poverty and Humanity, What Makes a Great Person and the Life of Napoleon, On Human Troubles, Mistakes, and Greatness. Now here's where my theory comes in. It is my belief that Miyazaki incorporated all of these themes within the movie in the exact same order as in the book. It has been repeatedly iterated by not only Miyazaki himself, but others that worked on the film that he was making this film for his grandchildren. Is it possible that he, knowing that they may not be interested in reading a book from 1937, still wanted to instill the same lessons in a much more engaging medium? So while the book and the movie are completely different in setting, plot, characters, and every other way you can imagine, the one way that they are the same is that they both teach the same lessons on these themes. So let's go through them one by one and let me show you what I found. I'll first tell you how the lesson is taught in the book, and then I will explain to you how Miyazaki teaches the same lesson in the movie. Number 1, on ways of looking at things. This particular story and essay in the book are about the realization in adolescence that the world does not revolve around you. Understanding that each and every person in the world is living their own life and dealing with their own set of problems and triumphs just like you are. At this point in the book, the uncle compares his nephew's realization to that of the famous philosopher Copernicus and his discovery that Earth, in fact, is not the center of our solar system, but the sun was the center. Due to this similarity to his nephew's new discovery, he nicknames him Copper. How is this same lesson taught in the movie, The Boy and the Heron? One could argue that Mahito learns this lesson immediately in the first scene of the movie. Gripped in anguish at the loss of his mother, Mahito is not able to grieve. He's forced to move on so quickly from the loss that he's unable to process it. Due to the war, his hometown of Tokyo becomes unsafe and they're forced to move into the country, thrust into a brand new life including a new village, home, family, school, and mother. The only way his brain can try to process this loss is through the nightmares about his mother. What a way to learn that the world does not revolve around you. Number 2, on true experience. The lesson to be learned from this chapter in the book is short and sweet, but impactful on Copper's life. The story we read is that of a boy in his class being relentlessly tormented and bullied for being poor. Then, one of Copper's friends decides to stand up for the child. This lesson is simple, but it's about standing up for people and doing what's right while sticking to your guns. Simply about morality and having a strong moral compass. We see this happen in The Boy and the Heron when Mahito makes the decision that he will put his own safety aside, as well as the concerns of his new family, to venture after his new stepmother into the unknown because he knows rescuing her is the right thing to do. Even when Kiriko begs him, pulling on his arm to stay, he remains steadfast in his dedication to rescue her and bring her back home. Number 3, on human relationships and the nature of real discoveries. The next ethics lesson told via story and lecture piggybacks off of the first lesson, and it is the next realization from Copper that not only is every human on the planet living their own separate life apart from him, but also the many vast ways that people are interconnected. The way that Copper experienced this realization was through reading his morning milk came all the way from Australia. This got him thinking about all the people and processes that the milk had to go to before it got to him. He calls this discovery the net rule of human particle relations, and describes the relationships between everything on the planet as being strings in a net and everyone being interconnected by something. He writes this to his uncle, and that reminds him of a conversation they had earlier about Newton. The first example we see of this in The Boy and the Heron is how everyone is interconnected in this other dimension. We see this as evidenced by Kiriko providing sustenance for the shadow people by fishing for them because they're unable to acquire food for themselves. As the movie continues, we see how far the net stretches, as this service that she provides also provides sustenance for the Wada Wada, and in turn provides sustenance for the pelicans, and eventually goes on to become people in the other world, spreading the net even further. Later in the film, a very visual and impactful representation of this in The Boy and the Heron is the hallway of doors. This could be seen as a metaphor for how all humans are interconnected. For example, Mahito was connected to his mother from another time in this way. We do not have the opportunity to see what lies behind all the other doors, but one could surmise that they lead to other people and places that are interconnected in some way or another. Number 4. On poverty and humanity. In the book, Copper comes to find that the boy who was being bullied for always smelling like tofu actually worked extremely hard to help his family. When the child gets sick for several days, Copper is assigned to bring him his homework. And when he does, he sees the boy is living in extreme poverty and spends nearly every second he's not at school doing back-breaking work to help his family survive while his father is missing. Copper is affluent in comparison to his new friend and feels very sorry for him. This allows him to view class and poverty in a new light. In The Boy and the Heron, we see class play into many facets of the movie, most of all that his father seems to be boastful of their wealth and wants to make it a point to drive Mahito to school in a car because none of the other students will have the same privilege. We see that the other students at his school are not impressed by this and very well could be the reason why he gets bullied. You also see this come into play with the suitcases full of canned goods that Natsuko brings back from her meeting Mahito's father. We can tell by the reaction of the old grannies that these foods are indeed a rare delicacy as well as the tobacco. So the comparisons are definitely made. Number 5, what makes a great person? These chapters in the book are thinly veiled ethics lessons because the other chapters are stories of the days in the life of Copper, but this one is basically a biography of Napoleon as told by one of his friends. I'm not gonna lie, this chapter was so boring I had to read it out loud to myself to make it through. The lesson taught in these chapters is about what makes a great person and the comparison of Napoleon's greatness to his perseverance and facing challenges with strength even when the odds were against him and he knew he would lose. I probably don't need to point out the obvious lesson taught in the movie with Mahito's perseverance and strength in a world where the odds are definitely against him. However, may I point out this nod to the book that I'm sure no one else has noticed. The Parrot King. He's dressed just like Napoleon and acts just like his personality is described in the book, risking his life bravely to rescue his people in a noble fashion, knowing that he may very well be rushing into defeat. Number 6, on human troubles, mistakes, and greatness. This is the final lesson Copper learns in the book, and it's a combination of his uncle's teaching and a self-taught lesson. It is in this chapter that Copper is able to put together all of the pieces of the lessons that he's learned thus far to come to the conclusion of the importance of living as a truly good man as his father intended. The book also wraps up by Copper finally getting to read all of the essays that his uncle has written to him over the years, then beginning to make his own theories and essays in his own notebook, similar to the way that his uncle had written to him for all of these years. This has to be the most striking and, in my opinion, meaningful component of the book that Miyazaki weaves throughout the story and comes to the most wonderful conclusion at the end of the film. Rather than Mahito reading the letters and essays written to him in the past, he interacts with important people in his life's past selves. Such a crazy way to portray this element of the book, but I'm sure we can all agree that it is much more interesting and innovative to accomplish the same goal in this way. Mahito is able to learn those lessons from his mother and Kiriko from their past younger selves. So if you were paying attention, not only does Miyazaki teach every single one of the same lessons that the book does, he also does it in the same chronological order. It's been repeatedly stated by those working on the film that Hayao Miyazaki made this movie for his grandchildren. Taking the content of the video into consideration, he was able to tell the story not only of his life, teach the most important lessons he learned, and simultaneously teach us all of the ethics lessons from his favorite book that shaped the man he became after reading it in his most formative years. Now do you understand why this movie won an Oscar? Do you see how much sense it actually makes? It truly is Miyazaki's magnum opus, the culmination of 50 plus years in the industry and 80 plus years on this planet. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Making this video completely changed my mind on this film. Doing the work brought me such a deep understanding of it. It gave me a profound appreciation for this work of art. At times, I got emotional uncovering the hidden meaning behind some of the things in this movie. For instance, knowing Kiriko is based off of one of Miyazaki's closest lifelong friends and his dedication to making the character's mannerisms resemble hers. And then later in my research, seeing a video of the two of them together, it just made my heart swell. Now, for those of you that have been paying attention, I did say at the beginning of the video that there are 3 leading theories on the meaning of this film. I have not gone into one of the most popular theories, which is that the movie pays homage to the 13 most important works from Miyazaki. Through my research, I can tell you definitively that this is absolutely 100% true. However, if I were to continue on this subject, I would end up with a video that was over an hour in length, and I don't know if that's something my brain is ready to commit to at this time. I have never made more than one video on the same subject, but this one is just too big, so I think it deserves it. Let me know if you would like to see a part 2 to this where I delve into the final theory of the meaning of The Boy and the Heron. Well, there you have it. An unraveling of the enchanting masterpiece, The Boy and the Heron. If you enjoyed this video, I have other video essays on Studio Ghibli films, including Howl's Moving Castle, Spirited Away, My Neighbor Totoro, and Kiki's Delivery Service. If I have not yet made a video essay on your favorite Studio Ghibli film, or favorite film in general, any animation, or even video games, let me know in the comments down below, what would you like to see next? If you made it this far in the video, I really appreciate your time, and I hope you do something today that makes you happy. See you later. Bye.